This is Algebra 2, Chapter 4, Unit 8, Methods for Solving Quadratic Equations Review and Finding the Discriminant. So we're going to first start off with this quadratic equation, x squared plus 6x plus 5. And we're going to use each of the 5 methods that we've been discussing in this chapter to solve this equation. If a method can't be used, we need to explain why it can't be used. So let's first take a look at graphing. First, we want to find the axis. So in order to find the axis, we take x equals negative b and divide that by 2a. Okay? So when our a value is the integer right before our x squared, in this case it is going to be 1. So our b value is 6. So to find the axis, we're going to take negative our b value, which is 6. So negative 6 divided by 2 times 1, which equals negative 6 divided by 2. That gets us negative 3. And that's our axis. Now to find our vertex, okay, now to find our axis is going to be our line of symmetry. So our axis is negative 3. Okay. Our vertex is going to be the lowest point, or where our graph reaches lowest or highest point. So one of those points, our x value, we already found our x value, which is negative 3. Okay. So our lowest point is, to find our vertex, is we're going to take negative 3 and square that. So we're just plugging in that negative 3 for x in our quadratic equation. So when we plug in negative 3, we get negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 5. Negative 3 squared equals 9. And then 6 times negative 3 equals negative 18 plus 5. Go ahead and combine those. We get negative 9 plus 5 equals negative 4. So that's our y value. So that is where it dips to the lowest. Okay, so this is our vertex. And when we graph it, we're also looking for our solution point, or where our line crosses the x-axis. Okay, so we notice that our line crosses the x-axis at negative 5 and at negative 1. Now we're going to factor. When we're factoring, we are looking for at our c value first. We're looking for factors of 5 that when added together equal 6, but when multiplied together equal 5. So in this case, our factors of 5 that when added together equal 6 are 5 and 1. Now we go ahead and we plug in our 5 and our 1, and then we set each of those equal to 0. We go ahead and draw our lines, okay, making sure that we separate them, so we separate the answers and we set each side equal to 0. So x plus 5 equals 0, x equals negative 5, and x plus 1 equals 0. And when we do that, x equals negative 1. And notice we get the same solution as we did in the graphing method. So both of those methods work for this case. Now we're going to look at three other methods. Next, we're going to look at square roots. Okay, so with square roots, it won't work because it can't be solved using the square root method since there's an x term. And what we mean by x term is that b value. We have a b value, so we can't do it by the square root method. Now we're going to complete the square. Okay, so completing the square is we are going to first take 6x and we're going to divide that by 2. So 6x divided by 2 equals 3. And then we're going to go ahead and square that. And 3 squared equals 9. So we go ahead and we plug into that 9 into both sides of the equation. Okay, and this is completing the square. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals negative 5 plus 9. When we add negative 5 plus 9, we get 4. And when we go ahead and factor x squared plus 6x plus 9, we're going to get x plus 3. And then we can just go ahead and square that because it's going to be the same factors. Now we go ahead and take the square root of both of those by completing the square. And we're left with x plus 3, and the square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. Now you want to solve for both positive 2 and negative 2. So you take x plus 3 equals 2, which would get us x plus 3 equals 2, which would get us negative 1, and x plus 3 equals negative 2, which would get us negative 5. Last, we're going to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so the quadratic formula, we first want to identify our a, our b, and our c value. So in this case, our a value is 1 because that's the integer, or the integer before x squared. Our b value is 6, and our c value is 5. We go ahead and plug in those variables. So we plug in our b value, so we have negative 6 plus or minus b squared, so 6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times 5 times c, which is 5, all over 2 times 1. Okay, so when we go ahead and square 6, we get 36, and negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, and negative 4 times 5 equals negative 20. So we go ahead and subtract 36 minus 20, and so we're left with the square root of 16. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 16, well, what's the square root of 16? 4. So we're left with negative 6 plus or minus 4 divided by 2. When we go ahead and solve that, negative 6 plus 4 equals negative 2, and then divide by 2, which would equal negative 1. Negative 6 minus 4, which equals negative 10, and divide that by 2, we get negative 5. Next, we want to find the discriminant. So the formula for the discriminant of a quadratic equation is b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so if you notice that this is the same, that is under the square root sign of the quadratic formula. So what information does it provide? So we're going to look at a little table, and I want you to write down. Okay, this table will come in handy. So we have the value of d, number of roots, and type of roots. So when d is greater than 0 and is a perfect square, we're going to have 2 roots, and they're going to be real and rational. When d is greater than 0 and not a perfect square, we're still going to have 2 roots, but it's going to be irrational. And when d equals 0, we're going to have 1 root, and it's going to be real or rational. And when d is less than 0, we're going to have 2 roots, and it's going to be imaginary. So it's important to note, I have a little typo right here, but this should be irrational right here. So let's look at some examples. We have find the value of the discriminant, then determine the number and types of roots. So our first example is 2x squared plus 12x minus 13. So we first want to identify what our a, b, and c values are. In this case, our a value is 2, our b value is 12, and our c value is negative 13. We go ahead and we plug those numbers in to the formula for the discriminant of a quadratic equation. So we plug in our b value, we get 12 squared. And then when we plug in our a and c value, we get negative 4 times 2 times negative 13. You go ahead and multiply those together. 12 squared is 144. Negative 4 times 2 is 8. And then negative 8 times negative 13 is positive 104. So we go ahead and add those together. We get 248. And so this is telling us that since our d value, which is this value right here, is greater than 0, we should have 2 real irrational roots. And it's irrational because it's not a perfect square. Now let's look at number 4 on your sheet. We have 3x squared plus 24. Well, we have to identify our A, B, and C values. So in this case, our A value is 3. We don't have a B value, so it's 0, and our C value is 24. We go ahead and plug that into the formula for the discriminant of a quadratic equation, and 0 squared equals 0, minus 4 times 3, which is 12, times 24, which is 288, negative 288. So we have 0 minus 288, and we're getting negative 288. Since this is negative and it's not, since this is negative, we're going to get two imaginary roots. And it's less than 0. Okay, now I'd like you to try numbers 2 and 3 on your own. Go ahead and pause the video while you do that. Here are the answers to 2 and 3. Choosing the best method to solve. Okay, so we have another chart. We have a method can be used and when. So graphing can be used sometimes. Usually it's not typical and not practical. It takes a lot of work, and when the roots are integers. Factoring can be used sometimes when the roots are rational. The square root method can be used sometimes when there's no b term or the x term. Completing the square can be used always when there's no x squared coefficient and an even b term or x term. And the quadratic formula can always be used anytime. You want to use it when other situations are inefficient. So go ahead and take some time to write down that. Now, I'd like you to do the problems on the next page, choosing the best method to solve the quadratic equation on your own, and also please complete the homework 8 of your homework packet. And this will be the end of chapter 4.